Hi everybody, Giselle Grenier here from artplace.ca. In today's video lesson, I'm going to be doing an experiment using heavy gel medium gloss. This is new from the DecoArt Americana premium line. So I'm going to try that. But just to give you a little bit of history, this is a requested, well, not really a requested demo, but we were talking about in the private Facebook group, Annie and I were talking about the liquid glass, and I was telling her that I was super excited about this particular product and that I would do a demo because it's nice for students and for the wonderful members of my formal teachings and the classes that I teach, and that when they ask about a product, especially if they can't get it locally, that I can show them what it can do. And because a lot of times they may have something, and I love liquid glass. The unfortunate thing is that squeeze bottle is a little hard on my arthritis. I have put it into another bottle. Again, I love liquid glass, but I love this. And this is a result of, unfortunately, DecoArt discontinuing one of their texture glass product. So I was super stoked when they released this. Just to show you, here we go. So it's textured, and this is just in my experimental art journal, and I absolutely love this. So I'm going to create a formal piece out of this. I'm going to show you from beginning to end and how to utilize that. And I'm not going to leave it transparent like this. I'm actually going to overlay it with some color. Okay. And what I'm going to be doing is starting with a little 6x6 canvas. I'm going to be upcycling it. So these are little canvases that I created paintings on many, many years ago. And these were experimental paintings, and I just basically cover them up with paint, gesso and paint, and then prep them for something different. But because this is a very warm tone, I'm going to be creating something super intense. So I need to basically prep this a little bit because I have no idea what's on here because it's been in storage. So I also have my paints, my brushes, and I have my stencil. So I'm just going to quickly go over the colors. So again, using the DecoArt Americana premium line, and to prep the surface, I'm going to be using the white gesso. And the colors, so I'm using Phthalo blue, Ultramarine blue, Hansa yellow light, burnt sienna, titanium white, and I'm using the heavy gel medium gloss. It's heavy gel medium gloss finish. And then to varnish it, I'm going to be using the Dura Clear High Gloss Polyurethane because I don't want to take away from this shine. This is optional, depends varnishing where it's going to be. So I'm going to put those up here, and you can tell from the colors I'm using a limited palette because you don't need to have 365 colors to use. And brushes, sorry, let me just quickly clean this because I just finished another video and I forgot to clean the varnish there. For brushes, and I'm going to explain why I'm using these. So I've got what's this one? Is this my, yeah. So a 1" and a 3/4 inch wash glaze. I've got a number 12 shader. I've got a little 3/8 inch dome stencil brush. I've got 2 different palette knives, a round brush, and my varnishing brush, which is a majestic. The Aqualon brushes I like using, and this is from another email that I got as to why I choose these brushes. These are all from Royal and Langnickel. The Aqualon brushes I like when I'm doing stuff like this, especially for teaching, because I can let these sit in water a little bit longer because they have an acrylic handle. This little doodad here, I can only leave it in water for a little bit. Anything with a wood handle will crack if you leave it in too long. And the palette knives to go through the stencil initially, the longer the palette knife, the more coverage you're going to get. But this one here is great for correction work because it's pointy. This is for touch-up, and I use this brush specifically for varnishing. So I hope that answers your question. And the majestic brushes also have an acrylic handle. The professional brushes, not so much professional brushes because these are professional brushes, but like the Sable Tex that I use and all that, they have a wood handle, but because I use those ones primarily for oils, I don't let them sit in water. So let's get this party started. I have my brush basin over here with water. It is super hot, so I'm going to try to work as fast as I can. Just going to use a little bit of gesso here, and I'm not looking, get my journal out of the way. I'm not looking at completely covering this. I just want to knock it down a bit, and I just wet the canvas a little bit just to help this flow. The gesso is super thick, which is nice. If you start off with gesso that's too thin, then you have to go through a whole process of thickening it up. And I have that on my blog on how to do that safely. But if you start off with thick gesso, then it's really easy to thin it. And I've got, with the media line, I've got 3 containers of gesso. One added as is, one that's thicker, and one that's thinner. So now what I'll do is, this one here is super thick, which is nice. And it makes it really easy to even push this stuff through a stencil as is. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm getting some brush strokes here, and you'll see why as I go along. And I'm hoping I can finish this project like right away, not including drying time, because it's going to be super, super, super hot today. And unfortunately, I can't do the videos when the air conditioner's on in the studio because you guys can't hear me. Just narrowing that down, just softening that up. I'm getting a little bit of texture. I'm being very mindful as to where I'm going. So I'm putting the texture around the side, a little bit of texture in the middle. And you'll see why. Okay. Put that in water. And I'm going to move that. Now, while that's still wet, just a tiny bit of phthalo blue, tiny bit of ultramarine blue, tiny bit of Hansa yellow, light, and let's just put a little bit of titanium white here just in case I just need a little bit of extra. So I'm going to take my 3/4 inch, so while this is wet, and I'm going to just grab a little bit of phthalo blue. And the nice thing with these back stapled canvases, I can hold them right this way, so hopefully you'll be able to see. And I'm just going to put phthalo blue around the edges. So now this is starting to dry up here a little bit, so I'm going to take a little bit of titanium white and go in here. You can use gesso too. There's no reason why you can't use any gesso. Just to get this started. And what I'm going to be doing, oh, this is nice and wet here. And what I'm doing is I'm going to go around to create a nice dark edge. And you can do this as many times as you want. Ideally, if you can do this wet on wet, it's the best. Here, I'm not too worried about it. It's more the outside. And if you're doing this in oils, then you already know what to do. But these paints are the premium acrylics. They last a much longer, they have a much longer open time because they're nice and thick, but there is an extender you can use if you need to. So now I'm going to take that brush, I'm just going to, you can't see, but I'm just going to blot it on paper towel. And now I'm going to pick up some ultramarine blue on that dirty brush. I'm just going to work that through here. I'm going to pick up some white just to help with the flow. And this by now is almost dry. And it's not a lot of ultramarine blue. You might be able to get away with just one brush load. And then where the edges meet, just lightly fan. If you have a mop brush, that'll actually look really nice too. I'm going to pick up a touch of Ultramarine, Hansa yellow light. Pick up a lot more white. And now I'm just going to work it back towards the outside. And we're just putting a little hint of green. And I like this misty look here. I don't want to take that away. I need a little bit of something here. I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine blue and white. Go in the middle. I'm going to pick up a speck of yellow, and then I'm just going to work that here. So what's happening is I actually lifted up some of the paint about a minute ago, and that's because the paint was getting tacky and it basically stuck to the brush as I was lifting it up. So if your paint is getting tacky, then you need to let it dry. You can mist with water if you want, but sometimes that just takes away from it and doesn't work. So I'm just going to paint the edges now. Same with the dirty brush. I just want this a little bit darker. This is the hardest part. Just don't overwork where you want it perfectly blended. I want to brighten that up too. I just want a little bit more. See, I'm going for the exact opposite where I don't want it perfectly blended. Okay, blot the brush. Now I'm just going to, you can use a mop brush for this part here, which works out really nice. Actually, I should show that. Let me just reach over for a sec. Little mop brush. And all the mop brush does is it just lightly blends the top layer of the paint, and you have to use it dry. It can't be wet. And just mist everything up. So see how I can soften that up? And I have a hair. I don't know how Chaos's hair got in here. Oh, that's just not coming up. So, okay, let me just show you what I'm going to do. Well, I could leave it there. I'm going to make a mess. So I have that to fix. So I'm just going to take my brush and just basically go over it. Take a bit of white. And work that into the piece. You can't just leave it the way it is. And then I can dust that again. So depending on what you want to do, I'm going to put that, I'm going to go for a smaller brush with a bit more white. Depending on what you want to do, if you want to make the center a little bit brighter, so work the white, then work it towards your outside. That way you get a nice bright area in the center, which was almost like simulates like a beam of light. I also use this brush dry. You see how when you have too much paint, it's really hard to get any blending to take place. So ease up on the paint. And if you find it getting tacky, I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint. I'm going to take a little bit more phthalo blue, which I'm going to need anyways in a minute because I'm going to show you how. Well, I'm not going to show you. You already saw. I'm just going to finish the sides. This is now getting really, really tacky. So I need to let this dry, because if I don't, then I'm going to run the risk of lifting up the paint. I'm hoping it'll happen so I can show you. It looks like it's not. Okay, well, I've done enough videos where the paint has lifted up, so hopefully you saw that. So now I'm going to let that sit like that. Now I'm going to take the ultramarine blue or the phthalo blue, and I'm just going to paint the sides, because these little back stapled canvases, you don't have to frame them. Take a little bit of water. And you know what? I know I'm going to run out of paint. I'm going to take the ultramarine blue then and mix that in there, so I don't have to, you know, pour any more phthalo blue and then waste the ultramarine blue. And the color will be much darker on this edge versus what's on here. So you have two choices. You can either bring some of that dark color over the edge or lighten this particular color. Knowing that acrylics will dry a little bit darker, I'm going to choose to add a bit of white. And just blend that over. I hope I don't drop my canvas. Wouldn't that be funny? Because we're doing this as an underwater scene, you don't want everything to be perfectly blended. If it's perfectly blended, then, well, mind you, there's nothing wrong with it being perfectly blended. It's just not the style that I want to go with. Nothing wrong with that, it'll just be calm water, but I don't want calm water. So it's up to you. So you can, if you want to make it perfectly blended, that's fine. There really isn't any wrong or right way of doing this. You could just put blue down and this will work. I will, though, bring a little bit more blue here because I don't want the white leading the eye out of the painting. Little composition things here and there. See how the nice action there? So now what I'm going to have to figure out now is, what do I want to set for the ground? Oh, I love that. The ground and the top. I'm going to use up the rest of the paint. So that's going to be what I have to do now. So I'm just going to pop that in there. Thinking I like that. Yeah. So I'm going to put the light towards the top. It's going to deepen up the corner a little bit. Again, if it's tacky, you got to let it dry. Then what you can do is, when you're ready to put more paint on, you can mist it with a little bit of water, or use extender as your base. Okay. That brush I should have put in water already. So now what I have to do is let this dry. Whoopsie, 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 whoopsie. Because we have to start working with the stenciling now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I don't need any of this. Oh, what a waste. What a waste. I hate wasting paint. Now I'm going to speed up the drying time with the heat gun, and then I'm going to show you, then we're going to stencil this using chromatic black. We're going to dry it, and then we're going to re-stencil with the heavy gloss. I poured out equal parts of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to make chromatic black. Now you can use basically any blue, any brown, because you can also use complements as long as they're dark. So I don't have alizarin crimson in this line. So thinking of even the traditions, permanent alizarin crimson and phthalo green, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, phthalo blue, burnt sienna, phthalo blue, burnt. So you can experiment. Now I've got color theory videos showing how to make chromatic black with all these different colors, because black out of the tube can be kind of dull. It's like a dead color. So I like making my own black. Chromatic black is black with color. So equal parts, and depending on the consistency of the paint, and I know that between the premium, the fluid acrylics, and traditions that the mixtures vary a little bit. So I'm going to take about half and I'm going to get started with that. It just depends on the transparency, and when you initially put it on, you may want to have it lean more towards brown or blue. So if you want it more brown, add more of the burnt sienna, you get something close to burnt umber. If you want more blue, like a Payne's gray, add more blue. And this is actually pretty good. I want to see the true underlying color to that. I knew I needed some white for something. So mine leans a bit more towards the blue. Actually, it's not too bad. It leans a little bit more towards the blue. Which is fine. Also remember that when you're looking at the paints, where are we? So on this one it doesn't. No, it doesn't say. On the traditions and the fluid acrylics, this is the first time I've noticed it. It has the transparency on it. This one has the color index numbers on it, but doesn't have the transparency. So, which is a shame. I got a little bit of white on there. That's easy to cover up with some more paint. So I'm going to be using this really cute little stencil. This is Coral. It's the DecoArt Americana Decor stencil line. And I'm going to position that, and you can position that any way you want. So I'm thinking about putting it right in the middle, because I can always come up and add a bit more dark. I can even lean it a bit more towards more this way. I'll do that, then I'll just dry brush over. So I loaded my little dome brush. This is also from Royal. And I'm just going to use a circular stroke. And you can see that the blue still comes through. If I use a pouncing stroke, because this is a back stapled canvas, there's a lot of bounce. So you have to make sure that your stencil you've got a really good grip on your stencil. What I like doing is for this particular one, I like doing a circle stroke first and rotate it. And then I'll come in and then I'll do a pounce because the coral is textured. And I'm using very little paint to start. Because I can always add more. On a dry brush, not a wet brush. And this stencil is super thick. It's really sturdy. You just have to be careful where there's an actual hard point that your brush doesn't catch on it. Now I can come in. You see the bounce on that. Hopefully you can actually see, period. If you want to have it completely black, then you can use black if you want. I didn't want it opaque. I wanted it to be semi-transparent. Because where the light is coming from the top, the coral would naturally be a little bit lighter. It's a semi-silhouette, I guess is a good way of putting it. Now, if you want it opaque, you could, to this, add a little bit of black to it. And that'll make it more opaque. Because the ultramarine blue is transparent, it's naturally going to show through. So if I lift this up, see? And some of the paint seeped through right here because it's really thick. I knew that was going to happen. And I'm not going to worry about fixing that. Only because coral has jags on it, so it looks a little bit more natural. darker here. And this stencil will have to definitely go in water right away. So I'm making the stencil more dark here. I'm gonna go in with my baby wipe and wipe that down. Darker, just a smidgen up here. And DecoArt has a stencil and brush cleaner which works. If you have 1000+ stain remover, which is also known as winning colors, you guys already know that I've been using that for a gazillion years. It works really well. There we go. Put that in. Now this can only stay in water for a little bit. I'm going to put this aside. And oh, I really need to replace this container. This is, it gives me such a hard time. Oh, that's why. 2 baby wipes. This is how I work my stencils when I don't have the water container nearby because of the animals. So I just leave it like that, and what that does is it just keeps the stencil a little bit wet until you get a chance to clean it. You just don't want air getting to it, you know, and then from there you can wipe, and look how easy it comes clean. Okay, so I'm going to put that over here. I'm going to clean this up. So that just needs to dry basically, and you can use your heat gun or hair blower if you want to do that. There's a little bit of touch-ups I'm going to do off camera just to clean up the little bits of white here. But these little jags here, I'm leaving those the way they are because it just adds to the natural look of things. Okay, so with this, if you find that even just some correction work, like here, that doesn't look right. So what I could do, I shouldn't have cleaned up that paint, because I'm going to show you how to do correction. And never do what I'm doing over your painting. Always do it on the side. I'm going to use my little round brush. You can come in and you can touch up. And I'm going to fill this in a little bit more. This has to be dry though, so don't do it if it's tacky. And that's what happens. See that white spot there? The paint was tacky and I lifted it up. There we go. Couldn't get it to happen with the background, but so you just can fill it in. Just don't fill in too much up here. Like think of if the light's coming through the back, you can really dry brush over a little bit of the center, because if the light's coming through the back, the outside edge will have a glow. So you could like almost like do it like a silver lining type of thing. You can dry brush if you have a tiny little dry brush, like a little stencil brush that's small. But these stencils work out great for getting the initial color on there. Because what we're going to do is once this is all ready to go, we're going to come back with the stencil and we're going to stencil the heavy gloss right on top of this. So it's important not to have any thick ridges of paint when doing this step. You don't want the palette knife to get caught. Okay, so I'm going to just continue on. I'm just going to finish tweaking this. Again, keeping the outside edges more light. Let it dry, fix that up, and then we'll stencil the gloss. Okay, so I cheated a little bit. I did some extra stuff off camera only because my head, I had to take my glasses off, my head had to be close. I was correcting all the little white splotches of paint that I had on there, and I thought, what about adding a silver lining to this? And I think that actually looks kind of cool. So the one thing that you can do too, if you happen to get white splotches, get another stencil brush and color mix a similar color. You don't have to do this. This is only if you've got splotches. So dry brush, and then you can dry brush. It's also useful if you want to darken your edges. Make sure you use round strokes. And because I'm using a canvas, I am going to see some canvas texture on here, which is totally fine. And you can, like I said, you can do this or not. You don't have to. I like having my corners, my edges, relatively dark for a painting like this, because then it keeps the eyes contained inside. I mean, it is a smaller piece, so I'm not too worried about it, but dry brushing adds another level of transparency to this. So the one thing you have to be careful when working with a back stapled canvas like this is the pressure you use on the canvas, because you're going to stretch the canvas. There are little spots for spacer bars, but they're so tiny. So this one here, you wouldn't need to use the spacer bars. They're the extra pieces of wood that come with the canvas. If you were doing this on a large scale, then yeah, you may want to do that. And I know with what I'm doing here is I want to bring this up a little bit darker here. I can even use a little bit of chromatic black. Not too much. Just to darken that bottom a bit more. I mean, it's more like a fantasy painting. It's not a realistic painting, because realistically this wouldn't be floating unless it became dislodged. But, oh, look what I did. So what do I do with that? Well, I can use the baby wipe to wipe it off. If your paint is tacky, you need to wait for it to dry. Then you can cover it up with paint. But there you go. I can also just add a little bit of, because this is the wood piece, just a little bit of darkness for texture, visual texture. This is not physical texture. To make it look like a little bit of ground. I like that. All right, so that's enough of that. And what I also did, excuse me, I took my round brush, went inside, and then and it was a happy accident just by using the silver lining and just going a little bit on the outside to look like a glow. I'm gonna hit it with the heat gun just for a second. That was my light. This dried really fast. You're going to reposition that, and you know what? You're probably not going to get it perfect, which is, sorry, to me, that's fine. You shouldn't need more than that. And what I'm looking now is the best way to apply this without getting the palette knife caught. So if I go this way, yeah, I'm pretty well going to be good to go. But I'm going to be using a technique. I don't have enough. I'm going to be using a technique. I'm actually going to create additional texture. It's called Impasto. And Impasto was like used by the old masters. You're using the product to create texture. Now, although this medium makes that job super easy, way back then, they didn't have stuff like this. Now I'm going to try to borrow. I want to get every nook and cranny full. Still don't have enough. You'll see why. I want to make sure that this stencil gives me a good thick application. Now, if you're new to this, before this step, you can varnish. The risk you run with that, if doing this step, is that this may not stick to the varnish, depending on what varnish you use. So, best thing is just to experiment. Now, with everything completely covered, I'm going to do this. Being very careful that I don't shift the stencil. Actually, I'm going to use the smaller stencil. There we go. And this is going to give the coral extra texture. See how the stencil's lifting? It's getting tacky. It's getting tacky on the stencil, not on the canvas. This is why you need lots of this medium. And it'll dry like this. And what you don't want to do is use a tool that's going to remove more of the product. You can also use a little brush with the medium and just kind of dab it in. And you don't want to slide, you want to lift. Okay. You can see where I missed because I ended up doing some touch-ups. So I'm going to grab my little round brush. And I'm going to push the medium over, grab whatever I have there. I'll take it off the stencil as well. This you have to work fairly quickly, especially with the stencil being like this. Now what I could do, but I'm in a groove right now, is scrape off everything off the stencil and use a palette knife as my palette. But when I'm in a groove like this, when it's just working perfectly, I don't care what I'm using, I'm not stopping. And hopefully my head's not getting in the way, because stuff like this, I usually put my head a little bit closer because I can't see. You're also going to start seeing a lot more from me. My formal training is in landscapes and wildlife, portraiture. You're going to start seeing a lot more of that stuff. This is all just because of new glasses and adapting how I do my paintings. Arthritis is a little bit more under control. And by doing stuff bigger, I don't have to worry so much about fine control. And doing this as well, touching up the edges, creates little extra bumps. I don't have that hard edge. This is completely up to you whether you want to do this or not. You don't have to. I would love to do this particular piece on a large scale. So what I could do is, unless DecoArt has a stencil this big, I don't believe they do, I could use my lineless grid system, trace this out, and then create a larger format of this. Or just freestyle. This is easy to freestyle. But I like the stenciled look of this. Okay. I'm going to take the rest here. I hate wasting product. I'm going to add more. And all I'm doing is I'm just dotting, adding more texture. And this is, you're modeling the shape. You're taking something that was flat and you're modeling it. So let's see if this will work. Be very careful when doing this, especially when you've got your favorite stencils. This I could have done over I'm drawing a blank, my art journal. So I'm just going to continue on doing this, and then when we come back, this is going to take, I'm going to let this dry for, well, as long as it takes, but I'm thinking, because of how humid it is in here, I'm thinking it's going to be a few hours. I'll put the fan on, not directly blowing because I don't want to blow dust. And trust me, this house I do have dust because I live so close to a street. And that'll help speed up the drying time. And you can't use a heat gun on this because all you're going to do is dry the outside layer, and then the inside layer is going to be still wet. So if you handle it, you're going to smush it. Here we go. Alrighty, so I'm going to leave you now, and I will see you in a little while. Well, when I said I was going to be back shortly, it's now 4 days later. The humidity was so strong and so high in the studio that it took a long time. But I don't know if you can see. I'm tilting it. I changed the lighting so you can see the texture. And I don't know if you'll be able to. You can see how raised it is, but it's quite lovely. Let's see how close I can get here. Isn't that beautiful? The same type of texture as coral. So what's nice about this is depending on how the light's going to hit it, you're going to have, let's see if I can do this right. You'll have, you know, something like this. Then you just, I'm going to tilt the canvas because I'm not going to get up to move the lights, but just depending on how the light hits it, you're going to have all this nice shimmer, which is a nice contrast to this almost like an eggshell finish on the background. Now, I was going to varnish everything with the high gloss varnish. I changed my mind. I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it the way it is because of the contrast. And thinking that depending on where this would go, if it's going to be going into, let's say, a really high humid area, I could varnish just around with a matte varnish. That way it'll still protect it. But, you know, you can use whatever finish you want, but I want to keep that contrast look in this. Joe saw this and thought, you should give that to Wolf, my grandson, because he's loving anything that's, you know, seahorses and, you know, underwater scenes. I was even doing a nice painting of a killer whale with a baby, a large format for his wall. I mean, he just loves that stuff. And blue is his favorite color, so I may just end up giving this to him. I don't know. But, so I hope that you enjoyed this and got some tips on creating some really easy artwork. And I'm not talking easy to diminish it, but just simple stuff you can create in a short period of time. Silhouette stuff is so pretty and so high contrast, and just by using a different type of medium to create additional texture, I mean that's just beautiful. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, as well as to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and to comment below if you picked up any extra tips, or if you have any other ideas using this type of technique. I may just showcase it in one of my future videos. Alrighty, so I hope you enjoyed this, and until I see you in the next lesson, stay inspired.